Dear Church, we ask questions during this series that maybe folks who wouldn't necessarily be part of our body or folks who aren't part of our church body might be asking. And we ask this question today: why are you so uncomfortable with doubt? I bet that many of us can associate with what we saw from the video there. I bet that many of us have been through times where we've had doubts. Maybe right here today you say, that's me right now. This isn't hypothetical, this is my life. Maybe there's been times where things have happened that have been very difficult, or you've prayed and you've asked God to do something and it just hasn't happened what you wanted, or others have let you down, or you feel that you've let yourself down, or whatever it may be. There's times where life isn't so easy, and we may have doubts, we may wrestle with this. And sometimes folks ask and say, am I a Christian if I have doubts, if I don't have this assurance that everybody seems to have? Is it possible for me to still be a Christian? And many people, I find when I talk to them about doubt, many people feel as if they're the only one. Like, you come here to a place like this, and you sit here, and everybody's singing and seems happy, and they're dressed nice, and they seem to have it all together. You say, am I the only one in this room who feels this way? Is something wrong with me? Is it just, maybe I don't have a real faith? But friends, I want you to know that if you struggle with doubt, you're normal, okay? You're normal. We all struggle from time to time. We all go through seasons of this. Don't stop where you're at. Don't just choose to live in this forever. I mean, if you have doubts, let them drive you to know God more. Like, for example, I've got my trusty stool here, right? I sit on this every weekend, so I've got a pretty good feel for how it is. You know, I'm pretty familiar with it. But let's say I sat down on it today, and this isn't the case, but say I sat down and it was really extra wobbly, right? Now that's going to give me some doubt as to whether or not I'm going to be safe sitting up here, or whether I'm going to just randomly fall on my rear end during this message, right? And that would be kind of an awkward moment. So I've kind of got two choices if it feels extra wobbly. One, I could just choose to exclude all those doubts from my mind and say, surely at Stillwater Church, there's nobody who would have pranked me by messing with my stool, right? Because they're all such good and caring people who would never ever want to do that to their pastor, right? But then I think, wait a minute, I know some of these people. I'm going to check this thing out. I'm not so sure, right? Because having doubts is a natural thing in life. And doing some checking out of things, and that's a silly little example, but much bigger example of our faith, our doubts should lead us to check out our faith a little more, to dig deeper, to ask questions, all of these kinds of things. Sometimes, when we have doubts, people kind of try to soothe these things over by giving simple answers. We call this bumper sticker theology, right? And so bumper sticker theology gives you easy, like everything happens for a reason, right? So don't worry about it. Or God is my co-pilot, right? It's me and him, we're buddies, we're both running the show here. Those really aren't true. Or this next one here, we talked about recently, God won't give you more than you can handle. If you were here, you know that's not true, because we talked about that whole myth. Or my favorite one I found this week, this one here, if Jesus had a gun, he'd still be alive today. Now this is no Second Amendment discussion, but if you see this guy driving around Dayton, please, by all means, invite him to Easter. It's going to blow his mind. But these little statements, they don't always help. Sometimes they hurt. When you lose a child and somebody says, it's all right, everything happens for a reason, God needs another angel. No, not true at all. There's times we need to wrestle with these things and seek truth. Because the Bible tells us that if we seek God, that we will find him. And I believe that because I found it true in my life, and I think that you'll find it true in your life as well. Simple answers make for complicated problems for those who might feel like they're on the edge of faith. I was talking about this with Pastor Brady this past week. You might remember that he is in the Army Reserves as a chaplain there, and he was telling me about a study on prisoners of war that they did. And they were studying to see of prisoners of war who were captured and went through these difficult times, what were the things that were most helpful, the mindsets that were most helpful to help them make it through. And there were some people who would take the mindset of saying, there's no hope, we're captured, these enemies are terrible, they're going to kill us, we're going to die. As you can imagine, those folks didn't do too well, having an extremely negative mindset. There were other folks who had an extremely positive mindset. They would say things like, don't worry, it's okay, we're going to be out here by Christmas, okay? Just a few more weeks, I know that they're going to come and get us. And you would think that perhaps they would do the best, right? The eternal optimists, right? But they actually were not the ones who did the best. The ones who did the best were more in the middle. And they would say, I don't know when we're getting out of here. I'm not sure. But what I do know is what I need to do to make it through this day. And they wouldn't try to give themselves false hope by setting arbitrary timelines, that kind of stuff. I think that it's okay to live in the midst of uncertainty and doubt, but to keep putting one foot in front of the other. To not become dismally depressed, but not to give ourselves false hope either, but instead to seek the truth. 1 Corinthians 13:12 says this, now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see things with perfect clarity. Now we've got to understand this. In their days, they didn't have the same mirrors that we have today. I mean, we look in the mirror, it's abundantly clear, right? But for them, they didn't have the same type of reflective abilities that we have. So it was more kind of like a shiny, polished thing that would give you sort of a reflection. It could tell you if the hair was all crazy, but it couldn't tell you exactly what you look like, right? So they're saying we see this reflection. It's kind of maybe a shadowy kind of reflection. That's what we get now. But someday we will see things with perfect clarity. And we have that hope that in Jesus Christ, that this world isn't all there is to it, and that someday we will understand the things of God with perfect clarity. But for now, we're on this journey of growing and coming to know God more. Let me tell you a story from the life of Jesus about a man who wrestled with doubt, and he was there standing before Jesus. And so if it was okay for him to do this, I think it's okay for us to be there too. Jesus had been having one of the most incredible days of his ministry. He had gone up on the mountaintop with Peter, James, and John, and there he was, we would say, transfigured, meaning that he began to glow, right? This was not normal, okay? He's glowing, and Moses and Elijah come down, and you're hearing the voice of God speaking, God the Father speaking, and it's this incredibly powerful moment, okay? And so they're up there on this mountaintop, and it's a wonderful time, and then they kind of come down off the mountaintop. Some of you have been at a spiritual mountaintop before. You're at a retreat, or you're just having a great time in your faith, or whatever it is, and then you kind of come down from that mountain back into reality, and reality hits you like a ton of bricks, right? This is what happened to Jesus. Mark chapter 9, verse 14. When they returned to the other disciples, they saw a crowd surrounding them, and some of the teachers of the religious law were arguing with them. Okay, so the disciples are arguing with the teachers of the religious law. This may not go well. Verse 15, when the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him. What's all this arguing about? Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, Teacher, I brought my son so that you could heal him. He's possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk. And whenever this spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to cast out this evil spirit, but they couldn't do it. So this guy has a very good reason to be having a crisis of faith. He has this son with this evil spirit that's causing him to have, we're talking grand mal seizure-like kind of activity, okay? So really serious stuff. It'll later tell us that sometimes this evil spirit will make this happen when the boy is near water, and he'll throw him into water or into fire. So here's this poor kid, he's got burns on his skin, and he can't have a normal life because you never know when one of these awful things is going to happen to him. So the father, you can bet he sought medical treatment all over the place, and now he's heard about Jesus. And he's heard about this one who heals. And so he finds out where Jesus is going to be at, and he goes there with his boy. And imagine his hopes and also his nervousness that this is the best hope that his son has for being healed. And so he gets there, and Jesus is nowhere to be found. And that feels like kind of a letdown, because he's usually with these other guys, but they're there. And they're like, hey, no problem, we've got it. We're Jesus' associates, right? We can handle this. And so they go and they try to cast out this evil spirit, and it doesn't work. And he's saying, what's going on here? I had faith that this could happen, and it's not happening. I'm sure this was just a terrible day to be this parent and to go through this. Now, you have to remember about Jesus that he's 100% God and 100% human, which means he has emotions just like we do. So Jesus has been up on the mountaintop in the presence of God the Father, and he comes down and he gets into this frustrating situation, and we can kind of see Jesus' frustration peeking through here. He says, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." I mean, it's kind of a comical thing, right? I mean, Jesus is like, oh my gosh, I've had it up to here. How much longer do I have to be here on this earth? I mean, tell me, when is it that we get that never mind. Let's come see the boy, okay? Bring him over here. So they bring the boy over to Jesus. At verse 20, they brought the boy, but when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion. He fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. So here, what the father is afraid of, it starts to happen. It's like this keeps getting worse and worse and worse. 21. How long has this been happening? Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the water or fire trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can. Now, here's a guy who's face to face with God in human form, and he's asking him to help. But even in his question, he's revealing this depth. He's not hiding at all. I mean, he puts it right out there. Help him, please, if you can. So now we have Jesus, meek and mild. You can imagine, right? He gives the guy a hug. He sings a round of kumbaya, and he heals him, right? Not exactly. Jesus says, what do you mean, if I can? Anything is possible if a person believes. It's like Jesus had it up to here today, right? And now you're questioning my ability to do miracles. What do you mean, if I can? Anything is possible for the one who believes. The Father instantly responds and says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Yeah, that's a verse that all of us, I think, should memorize. I think it's one of the most honest verses in the entire Bible. Because Jesus is telling him they need to believe, and he says, Lord, I do believe. I do. This is where I want to be. I trust in you, blah, blah, blah. But also, help my unbelief. There's parts of me, honestly, that aren't sure. You got to understand, you've been through what I've been through as a parent. It's hard sometimes. It's hard to have this unwavering faith. So, God, yes, I do believe in you. But help my unbelief. And you know, the interesting thing is, Jesus heals the child that day. Later, the disciples will come to him. In the book of Matthew, that's the story of the account of this story. They'll ask Jesus, hey, why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we cast out the demon? And Jesus will say that this only comes by prayer and fasting, and that if you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, like a teeny tiny seed, it's like a little piece of bird seed, right? If you had just that much faith, you could move mountains. He's kind of putting the disciples down a bit, saying that you're lacking this basic level of faith. But also he's looking at this guy and saying, you know, maybe, yes, he had his doubts, he had his challenges, but he had that mustard-sized seed amount of faith. What if that prayer, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief? What if that prayer is exactly what we need to have when we struggle with doubts. I think we see from the story that this is a prayer that God certainly answers. So in our life, how do we deal with doubt? I'll just give you 3 things today. First of all, to deal with doubt, be committed to the relationship, not to a problem-free life. Okay? Being committed to our relationship with God is first and foremost. Because when you give your life to Jesus, you're entering into a relationship with God. Jesus comes into your life, He forgives you your sins, He makes you righteous, as we sang about earlier, and He gives you His grace to help you walk through life each and every day, growing more and more and more like Jesus Christ. That's what we're given, okay? Sometimes we assume that this means there will be a problem-free life. You know, there won't be any more challenges in life. That things will be great because we have Jesus in our life, so we won't have more problems. But the truth is, we do still have problems sometimes. The Bible tells us this will happen. It says that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. We see it lived out through the people who lived in the Bible. There were many of them who were striving to live for God, but still went through problems and challenges and pain here in this world. And so if you're committed to a problem-free life, you're going to find yourself full of doubt on a regular basis, because these problems will bring doubt. But you know, when your primary commitment is to the relationship, you look at things differently. I think this is true in human relationships too. I mean, Jennifer and I have been married for 17 years. That's not overly long, I don't think. I mean, there's some of you here who've been married over 50, I know. Anybody over 50 here? Any couples? Yes? Several of you. That's awesome. I think that's, so 17, we're just barely getting like the engine warmed up here, right? Compared to you all. I mean, this is, so, but for us, at 17 years, I can tell you that we never committed to one another to have a problem-free life. And we assumed that there would be problems, that there would be challenges along the way. We just assumed that to be normal. And so in our life, well, this may be shocking to you. So you're all sitting down, yeah, you're all sitting down. Occasionally, Jennifer and I have problems. We even fight. We disagree hardcore sometimes. We have intense moments of Christian fellowship in our home, right? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how is it possible? How is it possible that someone could be married to someone as sweet and kind and wonderful and especially humble as our pastor and still have problems with him? I'm sure that's what you're thinking, right? So not at all what you're thinking, I'm sure, right? Look, marriage requires hard work, especially if you're married to a pastor. It requires like doubly hard work, right? Because imagine being married to someone who can preach at you anytime, like day or night, right? We're on it all the time, you know? We knew we'd have challenges. We knew we'd have problems. And on June 16th, 2001, I stood in a church before God, our friends, and Jennifer, and I looked into her eyes, and I said these vows that we had written, and one of the lines in them that we chose to include was, I said to her, Jennifer, I will never divorce you. And look, I know that many of us here today have been through divorce. I'm not trying to cast shade at anybody here, okay? I'm talking about our life, our commitment. But for us, this has been a central thing. That we said, you know what, before we go into this, we're going to take that off the table. It's not going to be an option for us because we know we're going to have problems. We know there's going to be days where we look back at this day and say, that was the biggest mistake I've ever made and I want out. And the truth is, there have been points that we both felt like that. There have been. But for us, our primary commitment is to the relationship. A, our relationship with God, and B, our relationship with one another. And so that means there's no way out. We are going to be not fighting against each other. No, we got to come to the same side as this and have it be John and Jennifer versus the problems, not John versus Jennifer. And we don't always walk this out perfectly. I don't want to come across to say acting like I got everything together, because I'm not perfect either. But the fact is that our commitment has been primarily to the relationship, and that will not change. And so for us, that's been a central thing in helping us through those times where we've had doubts in ourselves. And you know what? If we can have that kind of relationship between two imperfect people, imagine what's possible with God. Because in our relationship with God, unlike being married to myself or to Jennifer, where you've got an imperfect person there, you're in a relationship with one who truly is perfect, one who truly does keep his word, one who truly loves you fully, one who does not sin, one who never leaves you or forsakes you, one who's big enough to deal with all your doubts, with all your fears, with all your questions. In my devotions, I'm reading through the Psalms now, and I'm struck over and over by times where the authors of the Psalms have these doubts and these questions for God, and they throw them at him hardcore, and yet it's in the Bible, okay? So clearly God is okay with this kind of talk. It's part of Scripture. It's okay to go through these seasons of doubt, but don't get stuck there. Don't give up. Don't be spiritually or intellectually lazy and just say, you know what, I have doubts, that's just how it's going to be. No, seek truth. Seek truth. Seek help. Be committed to that relationship. Second, embrace the mystery and wrestle with your doubts. It's okay, friends, that you don't know everything about God. If you're here and you believe that you know everything about God, I love you, but you are wrong. I promise. You're wrong. I mean, God's ways are so much greater than my ways. I feel I know just a bit about God, and I'm trying to learn more every single day. And that's going to happen through the day that I die, okay? It's a lifelong journey. And you know, that's okay. Because mystery is a great thing in a relationship. I know Jennifer really well, better than anybody on this earth. She knows me really well, much better than anybody else on this planet. But the truth is, we still have a lot to learn. We're still getting to know each other better and better and better. And I don't want that ever to stop. Because there's something about that mystery that's what makes it fun and exciting and joyous. It's fun to continue to get to know someone, to continue to love someone more and more deeply. And again, if we can do this as humans, I'm a pretty limited, simple person. It's not that hard to get to know me, but God is so incredibly greater than me, so incredibly more complex than me. Imagine what it's like to have a lifelong getting to know God. If you look hard enough, you're going to find times where God may seem inconsistent. You may find that, like the tornado goes through the town and it destroys the church, and it totally leaves untouched the crack houses 3 blocks over, right? Like, God, why does this happen, right? Why is this? If you look hard up there, there's going to be plenty of reasonable questions that you may have. And sometimes we can stack all those things up and let those be the only things you look at. And I'm not in denial of the questions. It's okay to ask questions, but look at the other side of it as well. Look at all that God has done for you. And let me ask you, what's the baseline that you need to believe in God? What does God need to do for you that you would believe? Because let's just review the basics. I mean, the Bible tells us that He created this world, that He created you, that He knit you together in your mom's tummy, that you're no accident, friend. It tells you that He loves you, that He'll never leave you or forsake you, that He'd send His own Son to give His life for you, so that for you and me, while we were dead in our sins, that Christ died for us. That seems like a pretty good start, don't you think? What else is it? Really, what else are you holding out for to say, if God would make all these problems, if God would make me rich, if God would make me famous, if God would take this? I don't think that's necessary. At least I can tell you in my life, it's not. I can look and find endless ways that God has been and is faithful in my life. And I see it in your lives as well. And I believe that that's enough. For me, that's enough to follow Him. Sometimes doubts, the problem is not so much just the doubts themselves, the problem is where we place them. You know, the classic illustration, if you go out on like a beautiful starry night, there's the moon and all these stars, and it's so amazing. And you close an eye and you put your thumb right here. You can block out like the moon and like entire galaxies, right? You know, all sorts of stuff you can block out with one little thumb. You know, it doesn't take much. Why? Because of the position. When it's right in front of your face, that's about all you see. And sometimes we put our doubts right central in front of our face. And we forget about all the incredible things that God has done. We forget about all the goodness of God, about God's faithfulness from the very beginning of time, and God's promises about the future. We put all those things behind us and we say, yeah, but life hurts right now. And I get it. Life does hurt. And maybe you've got some pain right in front of your face right now, and there's nothing magical I can say that poof makes it all go away. I get that. But what would it take for you just to take a step back and say, yep, it's still there. It still hurts. But I want to see the magnitude, the greatness of who God is. And I want to judge God's actions based on everything that God has done, not only the challenges and the problems that I face right now. You know, you look at the church globally today. You got folks who are worshiping Jesus today in homes because they don't have a church building. The reason they don't have a church building is because if they did, the authorities would come and burn it down and potentially put them to death. That happens. Or you've got other folks who are in church buildings, but they know there's a chance that somebody could break in and kill them for their faith, just because they're doing exactly what I'm doing right now. You know, when I think about it in those terms, if those folks are able to embrace the mystery and wrestle with their doubts, I ought to be able to do the same. I ought to be able to do the same. Third, and finally, stay engaged with the church. Stay engaged with the church, because we say all the time, you can't do life alone. It's one of our values here, right? And you need one another. If you've got these doubts, and you don't talk to anybody, you don't ask anybody to pray for you, you don't ask anybody if they've ever felt this way, you don't ask anybody to care for you or to help you out or to help you seek answers, you don't come and talk to me or Pastor Brady or somebody else, or talk with your community group or seek a counselor, whatever it may be, friend, you're isolating yourself. And that's not what our faith is all about. We're here for one another. And the church is here to help you process these doubts. Do you want to go deeper? Do you really want to address these doubts? Because if you're just stuffing them down inside, you're kind of saying, I don't want to worry about it. It's not worth it. There was a guy named Jon. Jon was the son of a pastor, and his mom was this very, very strong Christian woman who she was the primary one who raised the kids, and she taught them all sorts of things about Jesus and life. And Jon felt called into Christian ministry, and so he got to go to school for this, got to go to one of the best schools of his day where he was educated. Jon was ordained in his church, became a pastor, and he went off to be a missionary in a faraway place. While he was a missionary there, things did not go well. Despite his family, his education, his pedigree, whatever, things didn't go well at all. In fact, he found himself in relationship trouble with his girlfriend. He found himself in legal trouble. He found himself fighting with his brother, who he'd gone to serve with. Things were so bad that Jon ended up fleeing the country by hopping on a boat and going across the Atlantic to go back home. As he traveled, he was reflecting on his failure. He was wrestling with his doubts and with his struggles. And a storm came up, not a metaphorical storm, a real big, powerful storm. And it was so big that Jon was convinced he was going to die. He was fully convinced of this. And he's there, and the waves are beating on the ship, and the rain is falling, and the wind is howling, and he's there literally screaming and crying because he thinks he's going to die. In between his screams, he hears the strangest sound. He hears the sound of singing. People are singing hymns. And he goes into this part of the ship. And here in the midst of this crazy big storm is this group of Christians. And they're singing these hymns, and they're filled with joy and peace in their hearts. And I would love to tell you that John went in and his life was changed in that moment by their faith. But he didn't do that. Instead, he got back home, still filled with doubt, still struggling and wrestling, because he didn't have in his heart what they had in their hearts. So he stayed engaged with the church. He talked with another Christian friend, and he said, I'm out. I'm done. This ministry thing is clearly not for me. I'm not even sure that I have faith. And his friend said to him something that would change his life. His friend said to him, preach faith until you have faith. A very interesting challenge. In AA, we say, fake it till you make it. And at first you might say, well, that doesn't seem very authentic. But what it is, it's really saying, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I believe that you are God. And I don't have everything figured out. I'm not sure of all the answers, but help this unbelief. Help me through. And John did just that. He preached faith until he had faith. One night, John would go to a small group meeting, a Bible study meeting, on a street called Aldersgate, where John Wesley, who founded our church, the United Methodist Church, John Wesley would say that his heart was strangely warmed. God reached out to him, met him in the midst of those doubts. Had he not talked to that friend, had he not preached faith till he had faith, had he not stayed faithful to God even in the midst of the doubts, that, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Had he not done that, imagine how different the world would be. Because John would start the Methodist Church, and literally millions upon millions of lives would be changed. People would come to know Jesus who didn't know Jesus. A great awakening would happen here on this continent. Hospitals, schools, missions, all sorts of things would be planted as a result of God working through one man's faith. Friend, don't give up. It's okay if you got some doubts here. Let them push you closer and closer to Jesus. Because I know better than I know anything else that he is faithful. That he won't leave you. That he won't forsake you. That he won't give up on you. If you're in the midst of the storm, friends, know that he is the Lord of all. And he's not giving up on you. Would you pray with me? God, would you meet us in our times of doubt? Lord, we struggle from time to time with these things, and we have some reasons sometimes where doubt seems very justifiable. And God, I pray that you would meet us as you met John Wesley, as you have met millions of Christians throughout history. God, would you draw us to yourself? Would you give us answers if we need answers? And give us faith if that's all we need. And whatever else, Lord, I pray that you would meet us right where we're at today. For Lord, we love you, and we pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen. In just a moment, our ushers are going to